My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old. I live in Richmond, Virginia. By profession, I'm a high school English teacher, and if you must know, my biggest flaw has always been this. I trusted people who never deserved it. The day I walked down the aisle should have been the happiest moment of my life. White dress, soft music, family smiling in pride. That's what little girls are told to dream about, right? But as my heels touched the long carpet and the organ played, all I heard were whispers. Look at her dress. Cheap fabric. Doesn't even fit her. The flowers? What a joke. They didn't lower their voices. They wanted me to hear. Because that's what my family was best at, humiliation disguised as concern. My own mother's eyes met mine. She gave me a small smile, but it wasn't love. It was a pity. And my father? He didn't even look at me. He kept adjusting his tie, as if he were embarrassed to be part of this wedding at all. My younger sister, Claire, sat in the front row draped in a satin dress that probably cost more than my entire gown. Her lips curved into the kind of smile that could slice skin. The kind of smile only a sister who enjoyed your pain could give. And then there was Ryan, the man I thought I was marrying out of love. The man who had promised me forever. He stood at the altar, handsome, polished, smiling in a way that looked perfect to everyone else. But I knew. I knew that smile wasn't for me. Still, I walked forward. Step by step, the whispers grew louder. Why did she invite so many of her students? That's embarrassing. Couldn't she at least afford real flowers? Poor Ryan. He deserves better. Each word burned through me, but I didn't break. Not this time, because they thought they were watching my humiliation. What they didn't realize was that this wasn't their show. It was mine, and when I reached the altar, when I looked into Ryan's eyes, I knew exactly what I was about to do. They said my wedding was an embarrassment. But what happened at the aisle destroyed them. You know, when people ask me about my family, I usually smile and say, we're close, but that's a lie. We were never close. We were a performance. I grew up in a big white house on the edge of the Richmond suburbs. My father was a lawyer, sharp, calculated, always chasing reputation more than justice. My mother? A Southern belle who lived for appearances. Perfect hair, perfect dinner parties, perfect gossip. And then there was Claire, my younger sister. The golden child. She had my father's sharp jawline and my mother's charm. She was effortless. Teachers adored her. Boys chased her. Neighbors whispered about how stunning she was. And me? I was the quiet one, the bookworm. The one who wore second-hand dresses because, as my mother said, why waste money on clothes for Emily? She doesn't stand out anyway. I remember one night Claire had just been crowned homecoming queen. My parents threw a party. Champagne, music, endless praise for their perfect daughter. I sat in the corner, holding a plastic cup of soda. My aunt leaned over and said quietly, "Don't worry, Emily. Every family needs a plain one. Plain one." That's who I was to them. Not the smart one, not the kind one, just the plain one. And Ryan was supposed to be my escape. I met him at a bookstore downtown. He asked me about the novel I was holding, and for the first time, someone looked at me, not through me. He didn't care about my sister, my parents, or my lack of glamour. Or at least, that's what I believed. But slowly, my family got their claws into him too. At dinners, my mother would say things like, "Ryan, imagine how much fun you'd have if you were with someone more outgoing, like Claire." And Claire would laugh, toss her hair, and sip her wine like it was a game, my father would corner him after, saying, "Son, if you want a career boost, I know partners in New York. I can connect you. But being tied to Emily may slow you down." I heard these things. I felt them stab into me like knives. And Ryan? He'd always smile politely, deflect, but never defend me. That silence was worse than their words. So when our wedding came, and my parents whispered about how embarrassing it was, and Claire smirked in her expensive satin dress, I realized something. This wasn't new. This had always been my life. A family that thrived on making me small, and a fiancé who let them. But what none of them knew was that I had learned to play their game, and on that aisle, in that moment, they thought I was the victim again. They were wrong. I used to think betrayal comes like thunder, loud, sudden, impossible to miss. But that's not true. Sometimes it slips in quietly like fog until you can't breathe anymore. It started with glances, small things only I noticed. At dinner, Claire's hand brushes Ryan's arm just a little too long. The way he looked at her when she laughed like a man hypnotized. The sudden silence when I entered the room. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just insecure. That's what my mother always said about me. "Emily, you overthink everything." But then there were the phone calls. Ryan would step outside at night, whispering into his phone. I'd ask, "Who was that?" And he'd smile, tired, kiss my forehead and say, "Work." Don't worry about it. But I did worry, because one night, I followed him. It was late, just after midnight. He left the apartment, phone pressed to his ear. I kept my distance, my heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't a spy. I wasn't brave. But something inside me pushed me forward. He stopped at the corner of 7th and Main, where the streetlights flickered. He leaned against his car, laughing softly into the phone. And then I heard it, her name, Claire. My blood froze. I stood there in the shadows, gripping the cold metal of the street poles so hard my knuckles turned white. He said her name the way he used to say mine, soft, careful, like a secret. When he hung up, I went home before he could see me. I sat in the dark kitchen, staring at the refrigerator light, listening to the hum of the machine. I wanted to scream, to break every glass in the cabinet, but instead, I stayed silent. The silence became my weapon. The next morning, I made him breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, just like always. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and acted like nothing was wrong. And I smiled back, because I knew, but the universe, it wanted me to see more. 2 weeks before the wedding, I went to my parents' house to drop off flower samples. Claire's car was in the driveway. I walked in quietly because I didn't want another fight. The house was too still. I climbed the stairs, step by slow step, until I reached her room. The door was cracked open, and inside Ryan, sitting on her bed. Claire's hand was resting on his knee. I didn't need to hear words. I didn't need to see more. My whole world shattered in that single frozen image. I didn't confront them. Not then. Not there. I just walked away, but in that silence, in that walk down the stairs, something in me shifted. I wasn't the plain one anymore. I wasn't the quiet shadow in their perfect family. No. I was the storm they never saw coming. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of them. I just walked away. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom of my apartment. I sat on the cold tile floor, still in my work clothes, my makeup smeared across my face. Pause, and for the first time, I let myself fall apart. I sobbed until my chest burned. I pressed my hand against my mouth so the neighbors wouldn't hear, because that's what I had always done, hide my pain. My reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, hollow, empty. Maybe they're right, I whispered to myself. Maybe I am an embarrassment. The words cut deeper than any knife. Because in my head, I could still hear my mother saying, Claire was always the beautiful one. Emily was always the quiet one. And now, even my Ryan chose her. The days that followed felt like walking through smoke. At work, I smiled. I answered phones. I filed papers. But inside, I was crumbling. I skipped meals. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, her hand on his knee, his smile, voice breaking, and the worst part, they didn't even look guilty. I thought about canceling the wedding, but then, the shame hit me. The invitations had gone out. The dress was hanging in my closet. My parents had already told everyone in the neighborhood. If I walked away now, they'd say I was pathetic, weak, the girl who couldn't even keep a man. So I stayed quiet. But silence has a way of changing you. It teaches you patience. It teaches you how to listen. And it sharpens you. Like a blade kept hidden in the dark, I began to notice more. The lies Ryan told, tiny ones, just to cover his late nights. The way Claire avoided looking me in the eye when she came over to help with wedding planning. Even my parents' subtle smiles, as if they already knew and approved. That was the part that broke me the most. Not just the betrayal of a man, but the betrayal of my family. There were nights I couldn't breathe. I'd sit on the edge of my bed, gripping the sheets so tightly my fingers ached. I thought about ending it all, walking into the water at Lake Michigan and never coming back. But every time the darkness pulled at me, another thought pushed harder. They don't deserve to win. That sentence saved me. One night, I wrote it down on a piece of paper. Just 4 words. I folded it, placed it inside the drawer of my nightstand. Every morning after that, I opened the drawer and read it. They don't deserve to win. And slowly, the tears dried. The sobs quieted. The fire inside me, though small, began to glow. I stopped thinking like a victim. I started thinking like a survivor. And in that silence, I began to plan. When people picture revenge, they think of fire, screaming, breaking things, public explosions. Mine didn't look like that. Mine started in silence. It began with something as simple as standing in front of the mirror. I stared at the woman looking back at me. Tired eyes, cheekbones I hadn't seen in years from all the weight I'd lost. But somewhere in there was still me. That night, I whispered, "You're not done." And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. I started small. I forced myself to eat again, simple meals, nothing fancy. I jogged by the lake just to remind myself I could still breathe without feeling pain. With every step, work became my anchor. I poured myself into projects, stayed late, volunteered for things no one else wanted, and people noticed. My boss, my colleagues, they started praising me. For the first time, I felt like I had an identity outside of Ryan's fiancé or Claire's sister. But the real shift happened one night when I overheard Ryan on the phone. He thought I was asleep. His voice was low, smug. "She doesn't suspect a thing. Once the wedding's done, everything will be ours, ours. Not mine, not his, ours." I froze in the hallway, the blood draining from my face. He wasn't just cheating. He was planning something bigger with her, money, assets, maybe even the house. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just leave quietly. I had to take everything from them. I started documenting every late night call, every strange bank transaction, every time Claire mysteriously helped with wedding costs but paid in cash. I kept receipts, screenshots, and recordings. At work, I learned how to scan documents discreetly and store them on a private drive, and when the loneliness became unbearable, I found help in unexpected places. One evening, after work, my coworker Lily stopped me. "Emily, are you okay? You've been different lately." I almost brushed her off, but something in her eyes, steady, kind, broke through my walls. So I told her, not everything, but enough. She didn't judge. She didn't pity me. She just said, "Then make them pay." Those 4 words became fuel. From there, the pieces fell into place. I hired a financial advisor under the guise of wedding planning. In reality, I asked him quiet, careful questions about marital assets and how they could be protected or stolen. I went to a lawyer anonymously at first. I wanted to know my options. What could be exposed? What could be recorded legally? I even reached out to an old friend from college, Sarah, who worked as a journalist in Chicago. Hypothetically, I said over coffee, what happens if a family's dirty laundry goes public? She smiled. Depends on how dirty, I smiled back. Because, oh, it was filthy, and through it all, I kept my mask on. To Ryan, I was the quiet bride, still nervous, still thankful he chose me. To Claire, I was the clueless sister, still leaning on her for help. To my parents, I was still the disappointment, desperate to prove my worth by marrying well. None of them saw the shift. None of them noticed the steel growing beneath my silence, but I did. And I knew, when the time came, they would never see me coming. People imagine revenge as this explosion, one big reveal. But that's not how it works. No, real revenge. It's slow. It's careful. It's a leak, not a flood. And my first leak happened at my own bridal shower. The house was full of women, cousins, aunts, Claire's friends, even Ryan's mother. Everyone laughed, clinked champagne glasses, unwrapped satin ribbons, and lace gifts. I sat there, smiling, playing the part of the grateful bride. But inside, my hands were shaking, because tucked inside my clutch was a tiny flash drive on a bank transfers. Thousands of dollars are moving between Ryan's account and Claire's, labeled as consulting fees. But I knew the truth. When Claire stood to give her toast, her voice syrupy sweet, I felt bile rise in my throat. "To Emily," she said, smiling widely, "my little sister. I've always wanted the best for her, and I can't wait to stand by her side on the most important day of her life." Everyone clapped, but I watched her eyes, cold, calculating. She wasn't celebrating me. She was celebrating what she thought she'd already stolen. So when the laughter settled, I spoke. "Claire," I said softly, "that was beautiful. Actually, there's something I want to share too." I pulled out a small gift-wrapped box and handed it to her. She looked confused, but opened it anyway. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a USB drive. I smiled. "Just a little something to show how grateful I am." The room went silent. Claire's hand froze. Her eyes flicked to mine, wide, panicked for just a second before she masked it. No one else knew what it meant, but she did. That night, she cornered me in the kitchen after everyone left. Her voice was sharp, low. "What the hell was that?" I tilted my head. Just a gift, you think you're clever? She hissed. You don't know what you're messing with. I stepped closer, lowering my voice until our faces were inches apart. Oh, I know exactly what I'm messing with. She went pale, but that was just the first crack. The real damage came a week later at the rehearsal dinner. Ryan had given a little speech about loyalty, about family, about how lucky he was to marry someone like me. The irony nearly made me choke. So, when it was my turn to speak, I took a breath and lied through my teeth. I just want to say how thankful I am to Ryan and Claire, I said, smiling sweetly. They've both been so supportive during this whole process. Honestly, I couldn't have done it without them. My mother clapped. My father nodded. But across the table, Ryan and Claire froze, because laced in those thankful words was something only they understood. A warning. I wasn't weak anymore. I wasn't blind, and from the way Ryan's fork slipped from his hand, from the way Claire's lips pressed tight, I knew they felt it. That night, Ryan tried to be casual. He slid into bed beside me, his hand brushing my arm. You've been different lately, he murmured. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I once loved. I saw a liar, a thief, a parasite. So I smiled, soft, almost tender. Maybe you just never really knew me. He went still. That was the beauty of it. They were unraveling, and I hadn't even touched the real evidence yet. The facade was cracking, piece by piece, and I was just getting started. Revenge isn't about speed. It's about patience. You don't pull the rope all at once. You tighten it inch by inch until they choke themselves. And that's exactly what I started doing. The first step was silence. I didn't accuse Ryan. I didn't confront Claire in front of anyone. I smiled. I laughed at their jokes. I played the perfect fiancée, the perfect little sister, because the longer they believed I was blind, the bolder they became, and bold people make mistakes. One evening, I forgot my phone at the dining table and went upstairs. Through the cracked stair rail, I watched Claire lean close to Ryan. After the wedding, she whispered, "We'll transfer the rest. She'll never notice." Ryan nodded, his hand brushing hers under the table. The intimacy made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to stay quiet because I was recording the whole thing. I also started feeding them false information. I told Ryan I was considering putting part of my savings into a joint account for our future. I told Claire I wanted her to help me choose a financial advisor. Both of them lit up, too greedy to hide it, and when Ryan offered to help me set up the account, I pretended to hesitate before agreeing. But what he didn't know was that the bank officer I met the next day, she was my ally. Every joint account Ryan tried to manipulate was flagged, copied, and documented under my name, paper trails, signed forms, his handwriting, his signature, proof. But my favorite move came during a casual dinner with my parents. Claire had dressed to impress, pearls at her throat, her smile glowing. Ryan played the attentive fiancé, pulling out my chair, kissing my hand. They thought they were flawless, untouchable. So I said, lightly, "Oh Claire, didn't you say you'd help Ryan with his business accounts last week?" Her fork froze mid-air. Ryan coughed. My parents looked between them, confused. I tilted my head, all innocence. Or was I not supposed to mention that? The air went cold. Claire laughed too quickly. Ryan muttered something about advice. But I saw the crack, a subtle shift in my father's eyes. The first seed of doubt was planted, and then I set the real trap. I invited them both to meet me at the bank to discuss merging finances before the wedding. Ryan arrived in his suit, Claire pretending she was just tagging along. They sat across the desk, smug, believing I was about to hand them my life savings, but the banker slid the papers toward them, papers that looked perfectly normal. Just sign here, she said. Ryan didn't even hesitate. He scribbled his name. Claire leaned in, pretending to explain something to me, before adding her own signature, and with those signatures, they gave me everything. No access to my money but evidence of fraud, intent, and collusion, because what they signed wasn't just a financial form. It was a legal copy of an agreement of responsibility, a trap I'd prepared with my lawyer. They just tied the noose around their own necks. That night, Claire texted me, "You trust me too much, Emmy." I stared at the screen, my lips curling. No, Claire. For the first time in my life, I trusted myself, and soon, the world would see who you really are. You know what the cruelest thing about betrayal is? It doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people who sit closest to you at the table. Pause, the people you trust to raise a glass at your wedding, and that's why I chose the aisle. The one place where Ryan and Claire thought they'd finally won. The church was glowing that morning. White lilies, stained glass spilling colors onto the carpet, guests buzzing, whispers floating, cameras flashing. I stood in the bridal suite, veil over my face, hands trembling. Not from fear, from rage. I turned into focus. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "Today, you don't cry." Today they do. The ceremony began. The music swelled. My father walked me down the aisle. I could see Ryan's fake smile at the altar, dimples perfectly placed for the guests. And next to him, Claire, my maid of honor. Her hands were clutching the bouquet, her eyes gleaming with silent victory. Everyone thought they were witnessing a love story, but only I knew this was the opening scene of their destruction. When the priest asked if anyone had objections, I raised my hand. Gasps filled the church. Ryan's smile cracked. Claire froze, her knuckles white around the flowers. "I have something to say," I whispered into the microphone. I reached into the folds of my dress and pulled out the folder. One by one, I laid the papers out on the altar, the fake accounts, the transfers, the agreement they'd signed with their own hands, and then the recording. I pressed play. Claire's voice echoed through the holy walls of the church. "After the wedding, we'll transfer the rest. She'll never notice." Ryan's reply followed. "Don't worry, she trusts us too much." The room erupted. Guests gasped. Some stood, whispering frantically. My father's face went pale. My mother covered her mouth, and Ryan, he lunged forward. "Emily, stop this. This is out of context." Claire hissed, trembling. "You vindictive little," but I held up my hand. "No, you don't get to talk anymore." I looked straight at my family, my friends, my entire world, and finally, with a steady voice, I said, "They called my wedding an embarrassment, but the only embarrassment here is standing right next to me." I pointed to Ryan, then to Claire, "And today, you've all seen the truth." The silence was deafening. Then came the whispers, the gasps, the sharp click of phones recording every moment. Ryan tried to grab my arm, but my security blocked him. Claire's mask shattered, her face twisting into pure hatred. As she screamed, "You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret it." But her words drowned under the sound of my guests leaving, the sound of her own reputation collapsing in real time. I didn't walk back down that aisle with a husband. I walked back alone, head high, veil lifted, not a bride abandoned, but a woman who refused to be destroyed. And behind me, Ryan and Claire were left choking on the ashes of their own lies. Do you know what happens the morning after you expose to people in front of everyone they know? They don't stay quiet. They claw, they scream, they bleed, trying to drag you down with them. The night of the wedding, I barely slept, not because of regret, but because of the flood of calls, texts, and emails. Guests who once pitied me were now apologizing. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted to meet. Even local news outlets sent messages. Bride exposes cheating groom and maid of honor in shocking twist. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, sipping black coffee, watching the city lights die into dawn. For the first time in years, I felt steady, but steady doesn't mean safe. Ryan struck first. By noon, his lawyer sent me a letter claiming I defamed him, that I'd humiliated him with fabricated evidence, that I owed him damages for emotional distress. I laughed when I read it. Pause, a bitter, sharp laugh, because what he didn't know was that every document I showed, every transfer slip, every recording was backed up, notarized, and authenticated. Still, seeing his name on legal paper sent a shiver through me. He wasn't giving up quietly. He never did. Then came Claire. She didn't go to a lawyer. She went to war online. Her social media is filled with venom. Emily was jealous. Emily faked everything. She couldn't handle Ryan loving someone else. She painted herself as the victim. The heartbroken friend was stabbed in the back, and some people believed her. They always do, because lies told with enough tears can look like the truth. But I didn't stay silent. One evening, I opened my laptop and uploaded the full recording. Uncut. No edits. Claire's voice. Ryan's voice. Every word of their conspiracy echoes. Raw and undeniable. The internet turned. Comments flooded her page. You lied. You're disgusting. You destroyed your own best friend. She shut down her accounts within days. Still, exposure doesn't erase scars. At work, colleagues looked at me differently. Some admired me. Others whispered. Being the woman who exposed her wedding became a label I couldn't peel off. At family gatherings, my parents shifted uncomfortably. They hated the scandal, the mess. Even though they finally admitted I had been right, their shame clung to me like smoke, and, in quiet moments, when the world stopped buzzing, I still heard Ryan's voice in my head. She trusts us too much, but I wasn't that woman anymore. Not the naive bride, not the girl desperate for approval. I hired my own lawyers. I gathered my allies. I rebuilt myself from the ruins they thought would bury me. And when Ryan and Claire tried to rise again, I was waiting. The courtroom was cold. Not the temperature, no. The kind of cold that seeps from polished wood, stiff collars, and the unblinking stares of strangers waiting to judge you. Ryan sat 2 tables away, his suit perfectly pressed, his jaw tight, but his eyes, they flickered, like a man rehearsing confidence but bleeding fear underneath. Claire wasn't by his side anymore, not legally, but she sat in the back row, dark glasses shielding her face, like a ghost clinging to a past she couldn't let go. Ryan's lawyers painted me as vindictive. Ladies and gentlemen, one of them said, this is a woman scorned. She fabricated stories to destroy her fiancé when he chose honesty over illusion. Honesty, the word nearly made me laugh. My lawyer stood next, calm, measured. but his words slice cleaner than any blade. This isn't a case about heartbreak. It's a case about fraud, about betrayal, about deliberate deception for financial and personal gain. We have the documents, we have the recordings, and today, you'll hear the truth with your own ears. And then it played, the recording. There, voices echoed through the courtroom. Ryan, she'll never know, Claire. By the time she finds out, the money will already be in our hands. Claire, God, you're right. She trusts us too much. The jury shifted in their seats. I watched Ryan's face crumble, second by second. Claire buried her head in her hands. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly. I loved him. I trusted her. I built my life around people who smiled to my face while sharpening knives behind my back. And when I tried to walk away quietly, they pushed harder. They wanted my silence. They wanted my money. They wanted me destroyed. I paused, met each pair of eyes before me, but I survived. And I refused to let predators walk free the room. When silent.by the end of the trial, the verdict was clear. Ryan was ordered to repay every cent he had stolen, with penalties that would shadow him for years. Claire, though not a defendant in the financial fraud, was subpoenaed in a separate case for perjury and conspiracy. They thought they could bury me in shame. Instead, they buried themselves outside the courthouse. Reporters swarmed. Flashes of cameras. Shouts of questions. Emily, how do you feel? Do you regret what happened at your wedding? I stopped, faced them head on. No, I said firmly. I don't regret it, because the truth doesn't need regret. It needs courage, and with that, I walked away. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker. There was no champagne. No celebration, just quiet, because revenge isn't victory, it's survival, and survival is lonely. Still, as the cold wind brushed against my skin, I finally felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom.it haunts me, not because of what I lost, but because of what it revealed. I thought betrayal came like thunder, loud, unavoidable, but the truth, it seeps in like water through cracks you never noticed. It's in the little lies, the way someone avoids your eyes, the quiet conversations you're never meant to hear. That's how it was with Ryan, with Claire. Not one explosion, but a slow bleed, until I almost had nothing left. People ask me, do you still love him? I don't, but I don't hate him either. Hatred is still a kind of tether. And I refuse to give him that. What I feel is emptier, colder, a quiet detachment that's harder than hate. Because hate means they mattered once. Now, they don't. If you're listening, maybe you know this feeling too. Maybe you've trusted too deeply. Maybe you've been silenced in a room where everyone pretended not to see. Maybe you've carried wounds that nobody else believed were real. I need you to hear me now. You are not weak for loving. You are not foolish for trusting. The shame doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the ones who turned your love into a weapon, revenge. It didn't heal me. It didn't erase the nights I cried alone, or the shame of walking down an aisle only to collapse in humiliation. But revenge gave me something else. It gave me a voice. It gave me proof that I wasn't crazy, that what they did was real and cruel and calculated. It pulled me out of the shadows they wanted to bury me in. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a bride abandoned. I don't see the girl who begged her parents to love her, or the woman who thought her worth was tied to a ring. I see someone who walked through fire and came out scarred. Yes, but standing, and sometimes that's enough. So if you're still here, still listening to my voice. Don't look away, because stories like mine aren't rare, they're everywhere. But most women stay silent, and silence is the enemy. This is where my story ends. Not with forgiveness, not with a happy ending, but with truth. And truth is all I ever needed, and maybe all you ever needed too. It's strange how life doesn't stop after destruction. The world doesn't pause for your grief. The sun still rises, the bills still arrive, the silence still waits for you every night. And yet I'm still here. After the wedding collapsed, I thought my life was over. But months have passed. The flowers have long withered. The dress sits in a box I refuse to open. The invitations I once saved, I burned, but the ashes didn't just take memories. They made space. I went back to school, not because I needed another degree, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could start again, that my story wasn't bound to a man, a family name, or a ruined aisle dot in the quiet corners of the library. I found something I had lost: focus, discipline, the ability to rebuild without anyone's permission. I've traveled too. Not far, just enough. A cabin in Vermont during winter. A small inn by the sea in Maine. Places where no one knew my name. No one whispered about the girl whose wedding exploded. I breathed air that wasn't poisoned with memory. I let silence feel safe again. Do I still believe in love? Yes, but not the kind I once worshipped. Not the kind where you lose yourself to keep someone else whole. Love now means choosing myself, my boundaries, my voice, and maybe, one day, if someone worthy arrives, they will meet me where I stand, not above me, not beneath me, but beside me. They still don't call, and I don't wait anymore. The hole they left will never close, but I've learned to build around it, to make my own family with people who choose me willingly, friends, strangers who became anchors, even the quiet comfort of women who listened to my story online and whispered back, "Me too." If you've carried betrayal, if you've stood in the ruins of what should have been joy, hear me now. You can rise, not quickly, not perfectly, but steadily, because destruction is never the ending. It's just a brutal beginning. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. Maybe that's the point. For the first time in years, I don't need to know. All I need is to keep walking.